the Ivy League. Yale giveth and Yale taketh away. Next on Campus Roundup. Hello, I'm Dr. Duke, and we're kicking off a brand new season of the Campus Roundup at the College Fix. This week we're headed to Yale University, a place we've been many times, where we're going to take a look at censorship, aristocracy, and much more. To talk about this, we welcome Jeremiah Poff, staff reporter for the College Fix. Jeremiah, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
And congratulations at your new position with the College Fix. Well earned.
Thank you.
So, here we have an interesting question here. A story that is almost too good to not laugh at. Yale University, an Ivy League school with billions of dollars of endowments, whose kids are going bankrupt trying to afford it. A school where social justice pieties reign, and yet they're trying to keep out Asians because they're overqualified, is spending a lot of time worried about a little stone carving outside the library. Explain to everybody what that's all about.
So basically, about 2 years ago, there's this carving outside the library at Yale. And about 2 years ago, it drew the ire of the social justice crowd, censorship crowd, because it depicts a Native American and a Puritan. And initially, it had a gun. The Puritan had a gun aimed at the Native American's head. So the first thing they did was they put a cement block in the middle to get rid of the gun. But then they decided that wasn't good enough, and so that they were going to take it down and make it available for study and research. But that was 2 years ago, and we hadn't heard anything about it. So I went up there, and turns out they haven't taken it down yet. Instead, they just have this ugly blue box over it. And it's still there. You just nobody can look at it.
They've built an ugly blue box in Yale blue to cover this ancient statue, ancient going back to the founding of the university. And when you look at the statue, I am blown away by a couple of things, this little carving. Number one, if you want to make the argument that the Puritan is pointing a gun at the Indian, then it's abundantly clear that the Indian has a bow, as in bow and arrow, pointed at the Puritan. That doesn't seem to bother them. They're only concerned about the gun, number one. And number two, I like the way that they use the politically correct term Native American and not Indian, but notice how they use the word Puritan here in all of its censorious context, right? So we've got an angry, repressed Puritan with a gun to the head of a Native American, and an innocent Native American who's just out holding a bow because he's hunting rabbits or something.
Yeah, no, that's essentially what it. I mean, you can see the bias in the language, right? You know, One is one you're attempting to kind of paint as more of the bad guy, and the other one is, you know, the oppressed, you know, native who was invaded and killed by the thousands. And
so the real comedy of the story, however, is this is a university. So rather than let it stand on display, they got to cover it and tell us they're going to make it available for viewing and for study. Isn't that ironic, right? Rather than a work of art that was meaningful in its time and part of the history of Yale University, rather that being available to everybody to draw their own conclusions, they've turned it into a kind of artifact, so no one's going to get to really see it, and no one's really going to get to study it.
Nope. Well, as it stands right now, and I went and knocked at the door of the Yale president's office and at the press office, and nobody would talk to me.
It's amazing to me at a university, for all this bleating about tenure protection so that people can freely investigate and speak and write. I guess that really kind of only cuts if your attitudes are all 100% progressive. Tell me what in your mind, Jeremiah, you were on campus trying to wade through all the bureaucracy. What does this tell you particularly as a reporter about the nature of academic inquiry on the campus of Yale University?
I mean, I think it just goes to show that the school is a factory of degrees, of credits, and that's all it is they're just trying to make as much money as they can and get as many students through their program as possible, and not really encourage actual academic inquiry and in-depth study into serious issues of American history or even, you know, world history and, you know, and philosophy.
You know, the progressive left is constantly telling us on college campuses that we should be ashamed of our history, and because we should be ashamed of our history, institutions with bad history should be pulled down or should be closed or shuttered. And yet here you have one of the most progressive institutions in America ashamed of its history, its own architectural history. And the solution is to cover it up. But why shouldn't they, Yale, have to pay the same price? They're saying that statues of Robert E. Lee should have to pay. It's odd the way the progressives find a way to hate their own history but never have to suffer the consequences for it.
Well, they covered it up, I guess, in the same way that, you know, it was a cover-up. In both the literal and figurative sense.
Well, to be fair, we should point out that there is still some good scholarship, some good ideas and thinking coming from the campus of Yale. You also, when you were there, did an interview with Professor Anthony Kronman, who is a very interesting fella and has written a remarkable book. Tell me about this professor and his work.
Right. So Professor Kronman, he was the former dean. He's been at Yale for a long time. He wrote this book called The Assault on American Excellence. And essentially what it boils down to is that he says that, you know, our society and especially our college campuses are being overrun by this radical egalitarianism. And he points to some examples of this specifically on his own campus. And one that I really find that he points out is that in their dormitories, there was like the master of the dorm. Well, a bunch of students or activist students decided that term reminded them of slavery. And so they essentially forced the school to change it. So there's no master of the dormitory anymore because master invokes memories of slavery, apparently.
I bet you they still have a master's program there, don't they?
Right, and that's one thing that he
go.
puts out in the book as well, is that, you know, well, if that's the logic we're going with, then why do we have master's degrees? You cannot be excellent in the art of being human, and you can't recognize that some people out there are more developed intellectually or you know, enjoy, you know, live their life to a fuller extent than somebody else, you know, in a sense creating this hierarchy of humanity not based on anything other than your own abilities.
Right. I mean, in a nutshell, the argument here is exceptionalism is being destroyed in the name of collectivism, right? When we talk about the professor's book, what he seems to be suggesting here is this radical need to pretend that everybody is the same always. That extends now to whatever gender you claim to be, too, that everybody is the same all the time. There's no differences. And it's really ironic and frustrating that on a college, by definition is a university, a college is a place where you are setting yourself aside from people who have not continued. It's called higher ed for a reason. Maybe we should get rid of the term higher ed and just call it something less offensive, right? Is the professor's ultimate point, I think, is we've got to go back to a system where we recognize merit and we recognize excellence. We want people to be excellent. There are ways that you can be excellent, Jeremiah, that I will never be able to reach. And there are probably, if I look hard enough, things that I might be able to excel in that other people wouldn't. Why is that, do you think, so wrong on college campuses these days? And what would the professor say about that?
The professor, he cited Alexis de Tocqueville a lot, who he called in Democracy in America, which is, you know, the 1800s work by the Frenchman when he came and observed American culture. And Tocqueville said that, while American democracy was something to be admired, it was not without its flaws. And one of them was that there's a tendency to go with the majority opinion, to go with, kind of encouraging groupthink. And then also there's this aversion to any sort of hierarchy or aristocracy. And an aristocracy is, in the original sense of the word, he told me, is that it was the people who are the best at something, not a cabal of people who rule us, like the term has become to be understood now. And Tocqueville believed that it was imperative that American democracy maintain a certain level of aristocracy in order to push back against that groupthink and basically taking the path of least resistance when it comes to opinions.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think de Tocqueville was a very wise and perceptive observer of American culture. And this is why, by the way, the ancients, the Greeks themselves, despised pure democracy. This idea that everyone is the same all the time. And we've never really had that kind of pure democracy throughout Western culture. And it seems to be what's being pushed for on college campuses now, this radical egalitarianism. But it seems to me that if you are, in order to teach at Yale, you have to be a PhD. And I think it's something like less than 1% of Americans have PhDs. I mean, they can pretend they're not an aristocracy all they want, but they are.
Yeah, no, and that's totally true. And Dr. Kronman has a JD and he has a PhD in philosophy. So he's a very well-read guy. He many times referenced Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics throughout our interview. And Aristotle would say that the virtue would lie between two extremes, and that the only extreme that is a virtue is excellence. And that was what he was talking about in our interview, is the need for excellence in all things, and to recognize true excellence when you see it.
Well, I'm really glad that we have a professor at Yale University willing to say these things. Last quick question for you. Has he experienced any blowback on radical egalitarian campuses like Yale for having said these things?
Well, I don't think so. He did say that he doesn't believe that his book is radical or extreme in any way. But although he did say that if it is perceived that way, it will be a testament to how far we've gone in almost an irredeemable direction. So I don't think he's faced any personal backlash, and so far it seems to be that's a good. He views that as a good thing.
It is a good thing. I got to ask you. I'd be remiss if I didn't. Did you, by any chance, ask the professor what he thought about the carving that was covered up?
Oh yes, I did. He didn't have a whole lot. He thought that was kind of more of a minor issue compared to like the issue with the masters of the dorms and a couple other issues that the campus has had.
Well, I appreciate it. This is a great way to kick off the season. Thank you very much for exposing what's going on with the danger. It's dangerous to be an ancient artwork on Yale's campus, and it's nice for me to know, very reassuring, that on Yale there is still a voice of common sense here and there in the faculty. Jeremiah Poff, thank you so much for your time this week. It was a pleasure. We'll see you again soon.